Hi, this is Carson with Troy, and I have with me fantasy author Matthew Wolf. Matthew, this is the second time you've been on with me. Go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the Ronin Saga and anything else you want to tell us about.
Love it. Thank you so much for having me, Carson. This is so I'm super excited. Book five just released in a best-selling fantasy series called the Ronin Saga. It is a high fantasy, so if you guys like anything from dragons, magic, elves, it's good high fantasy stuff. Meets knights, but the knights have elemental powers, kind of Lord of the Rings, little undertone to the whole world. So if you guys are readers of Sanderson, Stormlight Archives, Rothfuss, any of that kind of grand world building, it's totally gonna be up your alley. So we wrote four books in the series, each one about these three friends who find out they have elemental powers, these kind of next generation of warriors. And now they have to go to the city of moon and water and metal and these kind of grand kingdoms to find the others just like them. But the twist is everyone thinks they're evil. First off, it's not so good, kind of a little bad. And the second off is that if they're not evil, something else is. So it's this journey to find the other kindred legendary warriors just like them and go to the next cities and find them in time before rising evil destroys everything. So we just released Heart of Flesh, which is book five in the series, going to the great kingdom of Kovai, city of man and beast, toiling in the hot sun, where the main characters have to go to the great kingdom of flesh and fight in a grand tournament, battle to the death against some. Well, I'm going to go on and spoil some stuff, but anyway, it's a really fun. It's one of my favorite. I say this every time. It's my favorite installment yet. So can't wait.
That's awesome, and it's one of my favorite fantasy series. It's so good. If you haven't read it, the first book is A Knife's Edge, and Matthew is pretty prominent on the convention scene. Like he goes to tons of conventions, so there is a chance that you will see Matthew um, if you go to conventions, if you like that. Um, Unfortunately, Matthew's booth is always so busy because people want his books that I can barely say hi to him. So how has that been so successful for you?
Yeah, how is that? How there's I guess there's two questions. How is a good question, and then how does it feel is another one. So one that the first how I don't entirely know. I mean I don't do marketing prior. I actually kind of rarely tell people I'm going to a con until I'm like, oh shoot. Luckily I repeat, so Chicago, San Diego, all the big ones, all the fun ones. So people are like, I'm going to expect to see him again. So it's really cool to see repeat amazing readers. Like I still remember when you snuck in, I think it was a con or two ago, and you were like, I have a beef to pick with you. I was like, and it was like the best beef ever. I was like, why'd you do that to that character? And I was like, I know, I know.
I think my
So
exact words were, "I'll punch you in the mouth."
I think it was. I think it was. And I actually just instead of, I was like, I understand. I've gotten it before. Um, so I think it's just been a word of mouth thing. And I think obviously book one, book two, when I first did my first book one, it was like, venture at Comic Con, 40 people. And I sold to like, I think I sold to all 40 people there. But my first one was a grandma who was like, I totally biffed the pitch, but she just was like, that sounds great. Sounds dragons. And so she bought it. And so it's been a thing of growing and word of mouth. And I think the biggest thing is that I try, and my favorite part about it is really connecting with people. So normally I'm stuck behind a screen. And I think the other 30% is that there's been a lot of Audible sales. So a lot of people from Audible have seen it and been like, oh, cool. And then but the other thing is I love chatting with people. And so, which is both a good side and a bad side, because it's like, we will get a lot of like books stacked up to be signed. And I'll be getting ribbed by my assistants being like, okay, you've done enough. This person, 10 minutes, like these people are waiting. So I think making that connection has allowed people to really get excited to come back because I do genuinely do it. I really love meeting people and seeing everyone again. So it's not just like, can I sign up for you? Credit card, adios. So because otherwise I'm just like sitting there reading reviews. So people coming by and being like, hey man, I love this series, but why'd you do that? It's like it makes my whole con. So that's a really good question.
Awesome. Well, Heart of Flesh just came out on Kickstarter right now at the time of this recording. It's doing, you already reached your goals. It's doing phenomenal. Um, Now, Heart of Flesh, the title alone evokes something raw and powerful. Without spoilers, what does the title mean to you personally, and how does it reflect the emotional or thematic core of this book?
Ooh, God, you always ask the best questions. I always love these because I would let people like, how'd you start writing? And I'm like, well, and you say it so many times, you're like, oh, I love that. So Heart of Flesh was a hard one to come up with. Originally, we each book was very obviously thematic around different elemental cities. So Citadel of Fire is just basically a synonym for kingdom or castle. And of course, the Citadel is this, it is actually the Citadel. So what's the name? And then the next one was Bastion of Sun, the next one was Water. But at a certain point, I realized that there was only so many synonyms that were actually interesting for castle. So I was like, and then I realized the books were obviously getting deeper and more layered, and so I wanted to still invoke the elemental touch to it. So for me, the flesh was always going to come into it, but the heart of flesh, there's there's about three layers. There's one that's a bit of a spoiler at the end, but the first two layers, the first layer is that thematically is these characters are growing and deepening their bond between all the Ronin, which I think is the heart of the series. I really think it's just about these three, four, five friends who are 18, 20 year olds with these legendary powers who are, thrust into a situation far over their heads. So, and for them, it's this, they're getting to the heart of who they are as legends, and this kind of darkness that's both inside them and kind of outside the world. And so there's kind of layers, shades of gray that are deepening. And I think the they're kind of peeling back the onion layer, so to speak, within them. So that's kind of the heart of the heart of this is the heart of the flesh, the heart of these characters. A little bit of kind of an analogy there. The second is that heart of flesh. There's a kind of I play with different religions and connotations and things like that, and there's a lot of heart of flesh, both whether biblically and all this stuff. The idea of um, kind of the origin of what it means to be it, I'm trying not to spoil things, but basically it's about kind of these characters, their evolution in the heart of their journey. And then ultimately the last one, the third one, that's a little bit more of a spoiler, but is there's something, this grand kingdom, there is a tournament going on, the tournament of flesh. And in the tournament, there are, when they go into the Colosseum, there's the twist that you find out really early on is that everyone who is killed in the Colosseum, they basically, their spark, like in anywhere else in the world, the spark, it was just their essence, their core, their life goes up into the air. But in the Colosseum, the spark is absorbed and then it's directed into the next combatant. So they actually are able to absorb the power of the person they defeated. So at first it's a little macabre, but then you realize that spark is, our essence, our life force, our atoms, our beings go back into the world anyway. So they're basically saying rather than floating the essence of these people floating back into Farhaven, you're being able to imbibe it directly. So, which just means to say that most powerful warriors are imbibing all this spark. So one of the grand champion, her name is Nalia, has for the last 3 decades won 3 or 4 or 5 tournaments and has imbibed all the spark from hundreds of warriors and has become basically this kind of living god. So now Gray and they have to imbibe the spark too, and they wrestle with this idea of basically imbibing other people, but at the same time, they're warriors and they're committing to this thing. But at the same time, what does it mean to get stronger to kind of overcome this? So it's a layered thing, and ultimately, this is how did this become? How is the Colosseum even doing this? What is the magic behind it? So that's the real heart of the flesh stuff. Anyway, that was that was a good question that
That's
had me
awesome.
brain.
It sounds exciting. I can't wait to get it.
Can't wait.
Um, so this is the fifth book in your saga. What part of the world or even some lore did you finally get to explore in the book that you've been itching to reveal since book one?
Ooh, one word: dragons. The dragons. That's been one that's been I have been itching to talk about. There's this dry moss forest, which is this a dark enchanted wood where if you read Visions of a Hidden, it's a whole tale about Rydell and his journey to become this legendary warrior. He's kind of the stoic right hand of the Queen of the Elves, Kirill, and he's a powerful rank called a Hidden. And there's basically a woods he has to go into, trained every day since he's 3 years old to become this legendary warrior. And so in the woods, there's all sorts of enchanted magical things that are, everyone's like, it's the whole, you go into these woods, you don't come back. So dry moss forest is explored, dragons are explored. There's a lot more the powers that watching the Ronin explore their powers. Of course, it's not really something I haven't done in the other ones, but it's getting much deeper, much more layered. Um, of course, always finding a new Ronin is always fun.
Hmm.
And then Kovai in general, I've been itching to talk about the City of Flesh because it's different than the others. It's kind of um, dog eat dog, a little wild, and and how these characters kind of survive in it. And basically, the standing is everything in this world, in this city. So, of course, as they rise, it's the first time I think in the whole series that they're actually looked at as kind of gods. And so it's like, how do they react? Because always they're like, oh, the Ronin are evil, or oh, you're not really like. So it's the first time we get to see them kind of in this position of power, and it does go to their heads. Some of them it does, and how do they deal with that? So that's fun.
That's awesome. Was there a scene in Heart of Flesh that pushed you emotionally or creatively more than anything else you've written before? And
Oh
if
yeah,
so, how did you tackle that?
good question. There's a loss or two without going into too many spoilers
Am I gonna have to
that
punch you in the mouth again?
no, no. Luckily, this one I think is this one. I think. Wow. I don't know. I'm not. I always say her word. Her that character, insert character. That was such a like a side blind. Um, I hope if I do, when I see you at I'm like, oh, Carson, I'm gonna be deeper. Get a wall of my fans in front of me. So there was two or three scenes that really like kind of like tugged at my heartstrings. One there was a little bit more emotional development, the romance. It's very light. It's very family friendly still, but it was kind of cool to watch these characters grow because they're 18, 19, 20, and I haven't really touched on the whole love triangle kind of thing. Um, so that was kind of fun to touch on and watch these characters grow emotionally and mature. Um, but there's because this is a Coliseum battle and because it is to the death, there were some scenes that were like, okay, some characters that kind of grew on you pretty quickly. Um, that had to maybe some sacrifices had to be made, and honestly, there was a scene or two that wasn't necessarily a loss that touched on me, which was Zane's transformation. So a lot of people have known Zane as a really fun character. Book two, he was kind of a highlight. Book three, though, um, he was important, but book four, he basically fell off. So a lot of people have been like, "Where's Zane?" And as you know, I've been like, I wrote one chapter, and then everyone's like, "What the heck?" So he comes back, and I think his first chapter is some people's favorite chapters in the book, especially at the start. And watching his transformation because he lost someone so dear to him, and watching him kind of have this wall up, and how he has to let the wall down, and we all have our walls. And so watching that, um, and he gets some guidance from, sometimes it has to kind of hit him over the head a few different ways. Because sometimes we can hear it from one person, it can sound like wisdom, and then we actually have to experience what it means.
Right.
Um, so
That's like
yeah,
life.
it's just like life, right? Yeah. Yeah, we're like, sounds like wisdom, but I need to actually do it in order to believe it.
No, that's exciting. The stakes tend to escalate throughout the series. How do you keep tension fresh and meaningful without just making things bigger?
That's so interesting. That's says every question, but it's so good. Part of it is the emotional and human connection, right? The characters. That yeah, you're just like, it's a bigger dragon, it's bigger this. It's like, okay, you I think you have to be very authentic about it, and you have to be like, okay, these characters are what's really on the line. You really have to kind of think about what really could be. Sometimes I think that's hard for me because some of these characters are so entrenched. Like these nine Ronin, and I'm like, can I keep all the Ronin alive to the very end of the series? Um, and I have to kind of put myself in the line and go, I don't know what's going to happen in the next chapter. And the other thing I think is that the the scenes have to play into the greater, like it has to make sense with the character's greater ramifications. So what I mean to say is like throwing, Darius in a place where he's not meant to be, even if it's against some greater evil, is gonna feel flat. So even if the tension is light it's not a grand scary thing, but let's say it's him, like one of his things Darius can't use. He's a really fun character. That's who most people get, leaf tattoos and things like that. He's our fun roguish character, but he uses the power of nature, but he can't use the power of nature outside. That's something that's not living. And so it's kind of this like we find out it's a little bit of a weakness and a insecurity of his. So the tension there is how does he uncover that part of himself? And so that's just a simple one, but like it's how he has to go deeper and kind of risk something to understand like how he can access this greater power. And then of course the Battle of the Death Coliseum, of course, is always that's pretty stakesy. And then things that I wouldn't imagine that I've never really had the Ronin pairing off against each other. So that's a big tension thing that
Hmm.
I'm like, wait a second, not just big baddies, but against the people that you care about. So that's
Right.
always tension invoking.
Yeah.
So yeah, good
No,
question.
that's cool. So A Knife's Edge came out 2014, 2015, what, like
2014,
2014? So
11 years.
you've grown tremendously since your first book. What's one belief or writing habit you had back then that you've completely changed by now, by book five?
Um, well, I'll give you two. Probably one, I would edit things way too much. I'd write something and in that chapter, I'd edit it 75 times. I firmly believe a rough draft is a rough draft, and I just go on to the next chapter. It's a little hard. You can't like, they do stack on top of each other. So I still will write a chapter and it needs to like be solid enough foundation that I can build so the rest of the house on top of it. But I try to just get the whole thing out because I believe writing, kind of fluidly is better than uh, chopping up something and then just doesn't go anywhere. The biggest writing belief that I've changed, um, I this is going to be I don't I used to write every once in a while seeps into your head about what you think the readers want, which is a really interesting thing because it sounds like very what do the readers want? I just don't do that anymore because it's like as soon as you do that, I think you get out of the characters' heads. I don't even think about what I want. So I think I've gotten better. It's like a muscle you have to train about like not what sounds cool, not what the readers want, not what anything else is. And I used to do that. And sometimes the chapters would fall short because it's like, well, it sounded good in theory, but the characters felt like they were automatons going through actions. So I think now I just always write with the reader what the character is going to do in their heart, and that leads me down. Sometimes the chapters, and sometimes that chapter itself isn't great, but what it leads to is a really greater chapter down the line.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
Is there any habits that have changed over that same amount of time? Like writing
binge
habits?
writing has always been my wet method. Um, I still do a post-it note and I write every minute that I write. So if it's like I get up at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock and I do a little workout, it's my routine. And then I will just drive into writing as quickly as I can. And then I will like write 10 minutes or write 20 minutes and I'll write it down. And my plan is to always add up to 5 hours a day. And then I do a little blue highlighter across the post-it note and I put it on the wall. Monday, same thing. Tuesday, 8 hours, put it on the wall. And any day I didn't do it, I cross it out and it kind of has this affirmation. So that one's always been really good because it's just like I start to like, feet. I'm like, I look up at the wall and I'm like, yeah, 7 days of 8 hours a day. And at that point, it's like anything, once you go to the gym 2, 3 weeks in a row, it's just the initial inertia that stops you. And then once you're in, I don't even need the post-its notes, but I still do them. It's just that first week or two. The other thing that's changed is I started to do, this is kind of random, but I start a lot of times especially when I'm deeper into the world, I do voice notes, voice to text, and I will be driving and I'll just be like talking into the phone and the characters, I can kind of get into this little bit of a fugue state where I'm like very much like, they're like, oh, you stink. Like I get into the characters' heads really well. And then I look at the thing and I have to copy paste it into my WordPad or my Google Doc, and it's like, oh, this is so the words are all off. And the auto text says Zane says, some crazy sentence. So but I like the dialogue and everything because I can hear it real time. that's a new one. So
Awesome. And for those who don't know, so I had Matt on the podcast like 3 years ago, and I asked him more about him and his writing style and habits and stuff like that. So these last two questions is going to be interesting to see because I'm going to put that old interview up on YouTube a week before this one comes out. So it's going to be interesting to see like what he said back then and what he has now, in the 3 years. So that's going to be exciting.
I'm
Um,
curious to see that pairing. That's awesome.
now, Matthew, a lot of authors struggle to sustain long series. What's been your secret to staying motivated and connected to your story after all these years?
Fans is a huge one. I think some people treat their fans. I think a lot of people it works for them, but for me, the cons really help because I will feel me. Like I can't tell you like literally that comment obviously sits in my brain, the whole time, right? So that it's a little bit of fuel. Um, I have fans who are like all ages too, you know, 70, 80-year-old people just being like, get the book out before I pass. I'm like, okay, all right, you got the whole series out. Or I'll get this 8-year-old who come up and then yeah, I just, the last person who came up at the end of the day, um, she was so sweet. It was her and her mom. They walked up the table and they were just like, she was like shaking with nervousness. And this has happened once, but she was like, um, she's like, oh my gosh, she's like, I've read all the series multiple times. And I was like, oh, that's so exciting. And she's like, their dragon tier, which is one of my highest tiers on my Patreon. And then her mom was like, and we're also diamond tiers. So they're gonna be a character in the story. That's on my Kickstarter. So it's like for I think $600 or $700, you get to be a character in the story. And she just was like, they were just so I was like, you guys are amazing. What do you want? What do you want on the table? Let me sit you up. And they left and she came back and she's like, of course they wanted to take a picture. It was super cute. And she was like, this is like a dream. She whispered and I didn't hear it. And her mom had to say, she said, this is like a dream come true. And I was like, oh, it's just so sweet.
Man, that's like
Um,
heart-wrenching, right? Like it just gives you like
it's super
butterflies.
heart wrenching.
Yeah.
It makes me tear every time because it's like, some of these people that have transformed their lives, and they've transformed mine. Like, obviously, I wouldn't like, and so that is this epic fuel for me. People who are not even you and I are readers, but people who are not readers coming back and telling me that they read it 20 times and that they connect with the characters, and people will try to pitch them at a booth and they'll re-pitch my book instead, and they have tattoos of the saga and name their so it's not like in some ways it feels like an ego boost, but mostly it's just like I was a kid at 16 struggling to find my way in the world. And these characters were larger than life that had these moral guidelines, which I always tried to feed into my world. And it sustained me. And it made me who I am. And it was this kind of like, without Lord of the Rings, without Wheel of Time, without these series, I would not be who I am today. And so that is a huge fuel for me. That's part one of the answer. The part two, the simpler answer. You get a cat in my lap, is my writing companion. The second answer is that I'm guessing you've got a
My
gato
dog's
around
like right here.
right there. That's awesome. The second answer is that the characters, which sounds a little bit like, I believe in them, but it really is like, I think Faye, like when I finish a book, I feel like they're all freeze framed. And I feel really remiss not getting back to that world and diving back in and exploring where it goes. Um, it's also a little bit of like mind Jedi. I'm sure if I like, it's like anything. You could gratitude yourself in something or find a way that you don't like it. So I'm sure if I wanted, there's times where it's frustrating and difficult, and it feels tiresome to dive into a character maybe I'm struggling with. But generally speaking, I have such a gratitude for getting to do this every day, for watching the characters grow, because they were interesting, but they were so much more interesting now. Book one was like they're a little flatter. So it makes me excited to see how they'll grow and how they'll develop and how much more interesting they'll get as they go on. So
That's exciting.
yeah.
So you're running a Kickstarter campaign for Heart of Flesh right now. Um, and it kind of lets the authors and fans kind of connect. You said if they donate a certain amount, like, write a character in and whatnot. How did reader feedback and fan theories influence any of your decisions when writing the series, if there
It's
has been any?
Yeah, no, there's been a lot of those like fan. It's interesting when I'll read like a fanfic or something like that, and sometimes every once in a while they're good, and I'm like, I'll just copy paste this in. No, just kidding. um, but it is really interesting. They are really good. I sometimes, so for instance, the first influence ever was probably when I just finished book two and I published it. And we were still starting to grow, and people said, "Love Faye," and I liked writing her, so I had a feeling people would. And they're like, "I ship Faye and Gray," and I was like, "Interesting." There was a light like tension between the two the whole time, and so I've just leaned into it. The dynamic between those two, and I decided to write more and more Faye. She was originally always ever just to be a means to an end to get them from into the city of fire. And now she's taken a life of her own. So it definitely happens. Less more than I think so, because a lot of people are like, they just say things like, I like, I want to hear more of Darius, he needs more levity. And I'm like, oh, trust me, like I'm on board. I could, especially certain scenes, I'm like, okay, this scene was a heavy scene. We need some Darius jokes. Um, but nobody's given me too many crazy like this should happen. People are a lot of times just like asking what is going to happen. And the only other thing I think I see a lot is yeah, people being mad when I do things like that. I think the other one too is the people want to see more about the dragons. That was the thing that I've been kind of like I hinted on, and people want to know more about certain people's past. And for me, a lot of ways that I can do that is in novellas. I can kind of explore Ezra. Who is Ezra deep down? I can go into Arbiter's Gift. Who is Rydell? I can go into Vision. So it hasn't influenced as much as that, except for when people like really like a character. That's a very easy one. So if you're like, hey, I really like some side character, I might find myself writing it more because I do listen to that.
That's awesome. So I don't know if there is, but is there a piece of world building or history or something, cultural detail or minor character that fans might not notice as they read through the first time that they'd only pick up as they, pick it up for the second time?
I like that. Well, the first one that's like very obvious is the connection between the three friends. There's a lot of little Easter eggs that I try to hide in there. Some people catch on right away, but if you reread the books again and you see, they're like, why are these three friends so close? Like they basically leave everything to become, kind of these three friends. So that one's fun. There's a lot of little elemental snippets there. Um, there's something to do with the swords that I have not kind of hinted on about finding the swords and what the swords do. Um, some of the characters, there's a character named Sidophilus, who kind of is an interesting character in Bastion of Sun, who plays an important role, and there's some hints on why he's important. But he just kind of gets dropped off. He's the snooty lord. Uh, there's some language stuff that's pretty fun that I've been developing the languages as it goes on, which is kind of fun to see. Um, there, I'm really trying to make the Elvish and the Old Tongue start to get a little bit bigger, and so there's consistency throughout. That's kind of a fun little language thing for my language nerds. I think the biggest one though is going to be, without spoiling too much, is going to be either the Arbiters and then kind of like, and no, it's probably going to be the Origin of the Titans. So that one is probably the biggest one. Then the other one is this idea of Mr. and Master of Shadows. So there's this idea that there's all these great kingdoms on the surface, these 9 great kingdoms, and you got kings and queens that are in charge of them. But originally, way back when, there was also these 9 kind of fiefdoms. So as the series goes on, the plan is that as Faye gets more powerful and things like that, we're going to find that there is going to be the dark armies are kind of gathering their sides of the 9 kingdoms, but there's going to be a clash of kind of the fiefdoms rising to the surface as well to join either the side of good or the side of bad, and how that plays in. And then ultimately, the biggest undertone is the in Mistress Hitomi's Inn in book one. There's this whole conversation about these Renelin, the god of creation, and his son and his daughter. And so that is kind of this little slight note, little Easter egg that I've been picking up on, and eventually those characters might play a bigger role.
Awesome. Well, speaking of Easter eggs, is there Easter eggs or callbacks in Heart of Flesh that longtime readers should keep an eye out for without
Mm.
like spoiling them? You can literally just answer yes if you want to.
Yeah, yeah. I'll do yes in 3 words. Yes. No, I'll just give yes. Everything else is a spoiler.
That's fair enough.
Yeah, some fun ones.
So, this book coming out, Kickstarter. What's next on the horizon?
So I've been tossed between doing book 6 and doing Sky Thief 2. Sky Thief was a really fun one, which also has some Easter eggs that you see that they're actually in the same universe. So the most powerful characters in Farhaven can kind of go to the world of the Realm Walkers and back and forth. Um, Originally with the lit RPG series, it's a character who starts as a low rank and he gets stronger, kind of a Q fights with monsters or Cradle series or anything like that. Excuse me. His whole thing was that, hey, I got to get 3 or 4 or 5 of these books out because they're really fun, quick, awesome books. Well, I'm a high fantasy author, so instead of being 300 pages, I wrote in another 120,000 words. So it's a 600-page, really fun story tome. But that the plan was to write 3 or 4 of those and just be like boom, 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 snag people in, especially as you're writing and develops. I was like, all right, people are going to be hooked in because the story's stronger, deeper. I finished book 5 and I thought it was going to take me a while to get back in the characters' heads, but it was just I jumped right back in. A little bit of hiccup in the beginning, but after the first 20 pages, I was like, hit the ground running. Great, Darius and Ava were easy. So I kind of want to keep that going. But now that all the all the beta reviewers have read the book and they're like, it's amazing, I can't wait. Now Sky Thief 2. I'm like, okay, but yeah, but like you guys, like, there's gonna be a lot of people who have just finished this and they want to slight spoiler, slight giveaway. It ends on a bit of a note. I'm not going to say the word cliffhanger, but kind of cliffhanger. So it's going to be people wanting to be like, what's going to happen next? So I'm about 30% into book 6, and I'm about 50% into Sky Thief. And the hope is to write 3 or 4 Sky Thieves really back to back, and then just keep them both going. So I'm pretty torn. The only thing that would sway me one way or the other, aside from a bunch of people on the podcast reaching out and being like, "Do book 6," I'm susceptible to peer pressure. Is Tim Gerard Reynolds, my narrator, and so it's all about his narration schedule, which is actually why we wrote book 6 or book 5, because he was like, "I got 20 days. I'm excited. Let's dive in." So if either narrator opens up, then I'll finish one or the other. So yeah.
Awesome. Now, we talked about, fans coming to your booth. You are so great with your fans. This really isn't a question. This is a praise. If you are an author or just a fan and you want to see a fantastic booth to kind of pattern, go to Matthews. He's really, has huge signage. He takes fans back, behind the table to take photos. He's really connected. So just watch Matthew. He's a master class of interaction with fans and how to grow an audience. So you do such a wonderful job, and I look forward to seeing you every single time. What are some conventions that you are going to this year?
Thanks, Carson Press. That means the world. Um, the next one is Phoenix. I'll be at Phoenix June 6th to the 8th. So that's always one of my favorites. It's like 4 or 5 years we've been doing it. So it'll be big. We got a big giant booth this time, like last year. And some surprises too behind the booth, which is going to be exciting. Something that I haven't revealed. I always try to do that too. I'm always like, reason to come by to say hi, of course. It's my favorite, but other reason to come by, see if I have any little sneak peeks. Then Phoenix will be that. And then after that, I think it's San Diego is July. Oh no, I think Denver's between that, Denver Fan Expo. So I think that's the beginning of July. And then late July, San Diego Comic Con, always a crazy, wild, insane sanity. And then I think we go to, I think Salt Lake might be after that. I think Salt Lake September. Um, and I think maybe New York at the end of the year, and I think that might be the my full schedule. And then I'm back to Seattle and all those.
So full schedule, plenty of opportunities for people to come say hi to you. Go ahead and tell them how they can get a hold of you through social media or website or anything like that.
Yeah, you can't. This was the opportunity. You have to. All the books are going out of print now. You had your chance. If you're hyped on this series, too bad. No, the best way. So Audible listeners, just Google, Matthew Wolf, the Ronin Saga. Very easy. Huge Audible listeners. The best way right now, when this goes live, is I think we have 16, 70 days on the Kickstarter. You can obviously get signed limited editions. You can get book one starting. You can get the ebook, and we do a bunch of bundle sets to kind of discount things. Of course, you can get a character in the story, immortalize yourself. I think we have two more of those. And then we do a lot of cool add-ons into it. So I think the Gold Plus is the most popular on it. So if any of you guys are excited about it, you can kind of get letter from the character, all that cool stuff. But otherwise, the Kickstarter, Audible, or my website, mattwolfauthor.com. Those are all the three best ways.
Awesome. And if you're at a convention, make sure you hit them up.
Yes, check. Definitely that. Definitely that.
Well, thank you so much for having, not having, but thank you so much for being on the podcast today. I love talking with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Carson. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Troy Podcast. Please subscribe, like, and share with your friends.